Good evening. Good evening, and welcome to the Saturday evening gala readings of the 2007 Montana Festival of the Book. I'm Michael Murphy, Chair of Humanities Montana, which sponsors this event, and through our grants and other programs, many other events around the state. And it is my pleasure at this time to introduce a great supporter of Missoula and Montana culture, the Honorable John Engen, Mayor of Missoula, who will offer a welcome on behalf of the city. Mayor Engen.
First, a verse. My neighbor was hiding a hen in an unlicensed, unsightly pen. I called on the city to show me some pity, and now there's a chicken times 10. We're actually hoping to do all council meetings soon in verse, so sort of gearing up for that this evening. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I was graduated from the journalism school at the University of Montana, where years ago, one of my professors, who was just developing that first thin layer of crackling that later deepens into full-blown crustiness, gave me a piece of advice. Every journalist has a book in him, and that's where it should stay. I suspect there's some evidence to the contrary. We'll get into that later this evening, I believe. So I haven't written a book. And in light of my current profession, some say I haven't read one either. But some politicians do read books, and good ones at that. And I'm fortunate enough to be mayor in a place where you're more likely to run into a good writer than you are to run over a big pothole. Thank you very much. A place where there are at least a dozen locally penned poems for every barista at a coffee bar, and thank heavens a bartender for every barista. And all is in balance. So these writers, ladies and gentlemen, I think help us do our jobs as humans, which some days boils down to pulling a single thread of truth from a fading tapestry of ambiguity. Nonfiction writers reveal the fragile human condition through a thoughtful review of the facts, and fiction writers wring truth from imagination and observation. And because of their efforts, we learn of one another's tiny tragedies, our tepid triumphs, and once in a great while, we understand ourselves and our place a little better. And that is honorable work, I think. I actually hope there is a book in me. Frankly, there seems to be plenty of room. On behalf of the city of Missoula, ladies and gentlemen, I bid you welcome to the 2007 Festival of the Book as it continues.
Thank you, Mayor Engen. I'm the thank you guy here tonight. It's been a great festival this year, and I just want to spend just a little bit of time here to thank some people for this. The Festival of the Book would not be possible without the assistance of a lot of these people and organizations. And I'd like to thank the more than 100 writers and panelists who are appearing at this year's festival. Many have traveled great distances. All of them are here for their love and commitment to their art and to their readers, and we are sincerely appreciative of their support for the festival. Among the organizations that support us are, of course, our parent, the National Endowment for the Arts, but also the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Montana Arts Council, and of course the Missoulian. Many other local individuals, merchants, organizations listed in this evening's program support the festival in a great variety of ways, and to them we are most grateful. Special among them are the 4 Missoula bookstores, Fact and Fiction, Shakespeare and Company, Barnes and Noble, and the bookstore at the University of Montana, who constitute the festival bookstore and who make our authors' books available to festival goers and who display such good-spirited and generous support for a common cause. Recognition and thanks are also due to festival photographer Tony Cesare, who has been photographing the past 2 days, and the artist who created this year's wonderful poster, Joanna Yardley. The Montana Festival of the Book would not be possible without the devotion and work of the staff of Humanities Montana. Claire Leonard, Ken Stoltz, students Jennifer Harrison and Shannon O'Leary, and above all, festival coordinator Kim Anderson. In addition, let's hear it for the staff here. That's great. In addition, Judy Klein and Susan Carlson helped us immensely with the festival every year, and we're grateful for their dedication and hard work as well. A number of wonderful volunteers do important work for the festival, most notably MCH board members and past and present, Kathleen Ralph, Sue Neer, Ellen Crane, Nikki Warty, Danelle Jones, and Corby Skinner. So thanks to all of you. And lastly, we thank readers like you who support the festival with your attendance and your generous donations. We will thank you evermore if you just make one more stop in the donation box in the lobby at the evening's end. And as an inducement to that, tonight's gala readers will be available for signing and conversation in the theater lobby at the conclusion of this evening's performance. Their books will be on sale there also. You've seen that already, I'm sure. And to move us more expeditiously to that end, this evening's readings will be done without intermission. Now I'd like to introduce for an opening poem here, Victor Charlo. Victor Charlo is one of Montana's most respected poets and the great-grandson of Chief Victor Charlo of the Bitterroot Salish. Through his lineage, he is recognized as a spiritual leader. He's going to read a poem from his new anthology, Poems Across the Big Sky. Victor Charlo.
Thank you. This song is Walking Bear Song. Oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, hey, oh, hey, hey, oh, hey, 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 oh, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey. First polar bear for Chuck Jonkel. Years of long waiting become centered north As you leave warm reservation to travel unknown trails, guided by faith and spirit, knowing you are the center of the universe wherever you are, you try to walk in a sacred manner with all beings, knowing you do your best to do what is right. Your feet are light as song, Walking Bear song, that urges you on to country of your ancestors, the Cree and the Chippewa, and Walking Bear comes finally home. Was it ancient scratches on glacier-polished granite that told you ancestors were waiting, or was it the high wind that the geese ride north, or those owls who sang of the great snowy owls on the tree at your door at the old Dixon Agency? You want to paint your face the color mixed with red granite and Hudson's Bay water as a sign that you take your place at council fire with bears, to talk of relatives, to share songs. You remember teachers singing who Walking Bear was as you scratch your joy deep in smooth, hard stone. Away, 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 oh, away, 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 oh, hey, away, away, Shehoy, lam lamish.
Hi, I'm Larry Watson. This is the second time this week I've had the honor of introducing Ron Carlson. In my fiction writing class on Wednesday, we read and discussed one of his stories. Students say hello, by the way. But my personal Ron Carlson history goes back many years, and not just as a huge fan of his fiction. When I was a student in the writing program at the University of Utah in the 1970s, Ron Carlson visited the campus and gave a reading. It was a confusing, unsettling experience for many of us. Here was someone who seemed in many respects like one of us. He was our age, in fact, younger than some of us in the program. He's a regular guy, a nice guy. But Ron Carlson obviously was not one of us. He'd already published and published well. I believe he had a novel out, or at least had one under contract. His credentials were superior to our teachers. So plainly, despite the many indications of ordinary guyness, here was someone who dwelt up there with the gods as far as we were concerned. And of course, the ensuing years only confirmed his stature. He's won a slew of prizes and awards from the National Endowment for the Arts, from Plowshares, From Pushcart, his work has appeared regularly in the Best American Short Stories and O. Henry Prize anthologies. He's in the Norton Anthology of Contemporary Fiction, for God's sake. Among his short story collections are News of the World, Plan B for the Middle Class, Hotel Eden, At the Jim Bridger. His selected stories, A Kind of Flying, came out in 2003. His stories have appeared in The New Yorker, Esquire, Harper's, Glimmer Train, Plowshares, and every other quality literary magazine you can think of. His novels are Betrayed by F. Scott Fitzgerald, Truants, Speed of Light, and of course the most recent and universally praised Five Skies. He's also one of our most sensible, perceptive commentators on writing, as his new book, Ron Carlson Writes a Story, demonstrates. He's taught at Arizona State University and is now director of the graduate writing program at UC Irvine. So, with a resume like this, or a vita, as they say where I hang out, as impressive as this, and with prose as gorgeous as his, I have to say that for me, he's plainly one of the gods. But how about this? He's a god who walks among us, who plays golf, operates a chainsaw. Please welcome Ron Carlson.
Thank you very much. It is a stone-cold honor to be again in Montana. I was in Billings on a fresh night in October last, and I just love being up here. I'm a Western writer. I was born in Logan, Utah, and Logan's in this little piece. I'm going to read the first few pages from a new novel that I just finished. It's called In the Wind Rivers. This is one of the places where I won't have to tell you where the Wind Rivers are or what they are, and I'm not going to. He drove the smooth, winding two-track up through the high aspen grove and crossed the open meadow to the edge of the pines at the Cold Creek trailhead and parked his father's old blue Chevrolet pickup by the ruined wooden sign in the October twilight. He had been right. There were no other vehicles. There had been no fresh tire tracks on the 10-mile ascent from the old highway, except for the set of duels that had come almost halfway and turned around. That would have been Blue Bride's horse trailer seeing to his cattle last week. Mac had seen 24 heads scattered in the low sage all along the way. He got out of the truck and reached back for the coffee he'd picked up at the Crowheart General Store an hour ago. It was cold. He walked back and opened the tailgate and sat, finally, lifting his eyes to look back across the tiers of Wyoming spread beneath him east in echelons of brown and gray. It was dark here against the forest, but light gathered across the planet, and he could see the golden horizon at 150 miles. He wanted to see headlights, but there were none. He wanted to see headlights bumping up the old road to meet him at the appointed hour. He could tell that it had already snowed once, sometime last week, but there wasn't any sign of it now. No patches in the deep shade, no mud in the tracks. But the country was blonder, the grasses still standing, but bleached once, paler, as if slapped by the first weather of the season. Max sipped the cold coffee, thick with cream, and looked for her car. She would come or she wouldn't come, and he would still have his mission. He said it aloud. She'll come or she won't, but you're still going in. He stood down and retrieved the brown fleece vest she'd given him 5 years ago, and he moved to the toolbox and got out his stove and set it up on the tailgate and put his old pan half full of water on the blue ring of flame. He pulled his pack off the front seat and knelt in the grass against the wall of trees and set up his old two-man, a blue and gray throwback, 20 years old. He'd replaced the wands twice, but the zippers still worked. He threw his pad and sleeping bag into the tent and then laid the little raggy carpet sample on the ground at the entry. He'd been barefoot on it 100 times in the mountains. Some things he carried in because they made sense. It was dark working there, but again, behind the truck, the light of the world fell on his shoulders. To the north, he could see the one corner of the highway so far below, and those cars now had their lights on. He checked his pack for the electronics that Yarnell had given him, the tiny phone and the GPS reader. He had them in foil in a small Velveeta box. He double-checked all his side pockets, and then he unrolled his fishing vest and checked the 9 pockets in it for all his fishing gear. He repacked and clipped his rod segments along the back and then laid it all on the front seat. He was ready. He took his bonus cooler, the old Coleman from their dating days, and knelt and pushed it under the truck behind the cab. They always did it, left a cooler full of goodies for the day out. He could hear the water roiling on his stove now, and he walked back there and put in a finger loop of angel hair and then another. If she doesn't come, I'll eat double and sleep like a bear. He walked off and pissed in the open meadow and lit one of his cheap wooden-tipped cigarillos with his father's lighter, a Zippo that had been around the world twice in his father's pocket on troop ships. Mac was not scared. He had been uneasy and worried and scared and empty and sort of ruined, and he knew this. But now he had his way of doing one thing and then the next, and it kept the ruin off him. If she left Jackson by 4, she'd be along in a while. If she hadn't left Jackson, well then. She'd come down to the county jail 2 months ago where there wasn't a visiting room, and Zeph Menitis had brought him out to the coffee room and let them talk for 20 minutes. He could not look at her, and after a full minute she said softly, "Well." It took him 3 attempts to break through the whisper, and he said, "You bet. Now I'm in the ashes." Each tear cost him, but he could not, with his breath, prevent them. He hadn't been in a room with her all year, and now the quiet fires in his heart burned again. "You're going to climb out of this?" "Somehow," he said. He was talking straight down to the table. "You look rough." "Yeah, well, I'm about broke down, actually." That was all he could master, and he sat still. "Am I worried?" she said. Her voice broke him, every word. He could shake his head, and he did. "Yes," she said, "I am. Look, Mac, you'll be all right. Things will get better." "I'm a disgrace," he said. She read him accurately. "You been this low?" He could not speak. "When you get out Wednesday, can you get yourself together? What do you need for gear? Do you have a ride?" Her questions, solicitous and sensible, broke over him. He could hold steady against his own withering self-regard, but he could not hold against her sympathy. When she put her hand on his wrist, the shock ran through him. "Go fishing for a week. This will pass." "No can do." Then she leaned toward him and spoke against the top of his head. "Mac, don't let this beat you. You're a good man inside." Now the tears tripled, dripping onto the shirt sleeve of his jail shirt. "Meet me," she said. "You can do that, right? We'll make our last trip next month. Meet me and we'll fish Clark for the last time." Somehow air came into his chest, and with that, and he said quietly, "Deal." He looked up into her face, the seriousness and the concern. "I will be there." He'd been here 10 times. This was the 10th time. Every year on the same day, the Ides of September, 9/15, which is today. The promise had been made that first time, and they'd kept it 9 times. We'll do this every year. They weren't married the first time, and then they had been married 8 times, and now they weren't married again, as far as he knew. The lawyer letters, 5 of them, were filed unopened in a cubby of his father's roll top in the bunkhouse where Mac lived on the home place south of Wilson, golden envelopes with return addresses pretty as wedding invitations. He felt better tonight, strong for some reason, but he'd been getting better since walking out of jail. It could have been so much worse. He'd been running in low-rent behavior for almost a year, scrambling for money, crossing the line when it worked for him, drinking too much because it didn't matter, and the company he kept drank. He had trouble with the mortgage, and he'd driven cars to Cheyenne and Rock Springs more than once, not asking what was in the trunk, just taking the $1,000 and walking away. He'd been an idiot, and he'd rusted like an old post when the weather turned. Now he shook his head at it in dark wonder. It was like the old song. He was lost and now he was found, even if there wasn't much left. He knew this trip was the right thing, and he'd even gotten well enough to call her and let her off the hook. He didn't want the sympathy vote. He didn't need it, but he was going fishing at the appointed hour. He'd met Vonnie when they were both 17, and he didn't like her immediately because it was his personal policy to dislike all the people who came to the ranch, the families from Grosse Pointe and Greenwich and Manhattan and Princeton and the 10 other Platinum Republics in their beautiful flannel shirts and new Levi's. He treated them well and saw to their safety around the horses, and he taught them what he could about the ranch and knots and fire safety and the birds and the snakes and the occasional bears. He took them to Big Springs and Rock Tree trailheads, but never here. He envied their gear, their gorgeous bone pocket knives, but he never stole one. He was quiet and known as being quiet, and it was not an act. He had learned that it was the way he kept any power at all. After his mother died of the cancer, and his father and the ranch manager, Sawyer Day, saw the money story, they started taking 10 weeks of guests in the summers, and they needed the money. They hired a great cook, a woman named Amarantha out of Logan, Utah, and she laid a table like he had never seen. For those years, the ranch paid its bills. The reputation of Box Creek grew, and they were booked steady all those years, 24 people every week, and Mac grew up with them from the time he was 10, answering the same questions about horseshoes and hay, and can I feed this horse an apple without him biting me? A horse on a dude ranch eats a lot of apples. Vonnie's family came out from Chapel Hill, where her mother was a professor of political science, and he gave her the same horse every year, Rusty, a benevolent roan who was golden once a day if the sun was right. Vonnie was a strong athlete and played soccer in college, but Mac avoided her, as he did all the guests, easily. The guests had romances with other guests, even the parents sometimes, most times really, and Mac had plenty of work grooming horses when the day ended and everyone showered in the big house and the 2 cottages and then lined up for Amarantha's astounding buffet. Plus, his father had spoken to him after the 3rd summer. It was obvious the way the kids hung out by the rail fence when Mac was shoeing a horse or working the tack. They'd follow him around, the boys and the girls, and they wanted to know about him. His father called him into the big ranch house, and they sat in the small front office, which Sawyer Day used 2 days a week. He came out to do books, and they talked. "These kids look up to you," his father said. "I don't know," Mac said. "Yes, you do. They should look up to you. You're a good hand. They're not used to this. All they've got is their car and the junior prom. You're an exotic item, Mac." "Okay," the boy said. "But what we are to these people is a sort of cliche. They come out here to taste this, and it's good for all of us. But these girls, some of them are going to fall for you big, strong cowboy. Come on, you can look at me. I know you're a good kid. Some of these gals from New York even come after your old man, a little fling out west for a week. You want to be a cliche?" "No, sir," Mac said, "I don't." "That's all. I expect you know what to do. Talk the day with them and business and horses, and then send them back to supper. Don't walk with them or have them out near the bunkhouse. My eyes are right here. I know you know what to do. I don't want this business venture we're in to hurt you, boy. I love you, and I love this place. Do you know it?" "Yes, sir, I do." "Show me your hands." Mac held his hands out up and turned them over. They'd always done this, a show of hands. His father looked him over, nails, cuticles, knuckles, palms. You could tell a good ranch hand by the number of nicks, the fewer the better. And as the years passed, Mac's hands cleared up. His father squeezed his hands and said, "Well, it's enough of that. Quite a talk for the old homestead. You go, get to work." And he did the work on the long day ranch schedule. On Thursday nights, he ran the 1 late-night campfire, all those chocolate crackers, and then the spooky story. He had started it when he was 13, the story he'd heard part of from his own dad about Hiram, broken-hearted and half mad, who still roamed the woods near here, living in rotten logs and following campers in his search for a beating heart. At night, when the fishermen's campfires would dwindle down to wavering coals, Hiram would sneak into the camps and reach into the tents and put his head against the campers' chests to try to hear again the thumping of a heart. His own had stopped so long ago. Mac would let the big ranch fire dwindle and collapse, and he'd lower his voice as he told the episodes. Half the kids would already be in their pajamas and robes, sitting there legs up in the canvas camp chairs, listening. They'd all heard of Hiram from last week or from last summer, and his legend was part of the Box Creek Ranch lore now. Mac would hold out his hand like a claw and say how Hiram only wanted human contact. But he was misunderstood and called a cannibal, though there was never any proof of that. I think he was a cannibal, some boy would say. He ate the campers and cooked them over the fire. They never came back. Mac would let this remark hang in the air. He's out there, Mac would say, and now we know for sure he's misunderstood. If the children got too frightened, which is why they'd come every week, Mac would back up and tell about Hiram's younger days working with wild geese and his travels in the cities which did not agree with him. Then as the hour turned, Mac would stand and stir the fire pit, and as the cinders schooled up red, he would say, "Hiram listens for a beating heart. Can you hear your beating heart? Now scoot. We're going to ride horses tomorrow, and I don't want you falling asleep." It was a favorite time for him, watching the young people scurry back to the cabin's lit porches. They tried not to run, but sometimes they ran. It was his first love, the ranch, and he loved it night and day. Then came his second. The year he was 17, Mac took the weekly ridge ride with all the kids. 9 riders winding up the Line Shack Trail to the aspen draws that led to the mountaintop. He rode his horse Copper Bob, the captain. There were 2 old log cabins along the way, slumped and fallen in, new trees thrusting through the collapsed roof beams. They always stopped and took stagey pictures with the young people pretending to knock at the doorway or looking out of the ancient window frames. Sometimes they dug around for old cans or bottles, and they made up stories about the lonely men who lived here, how they had a dog or played cards all winter. One of the young riders would always say, "Maybe this is where Hiram lived." And Mac would say that he never slept in the same place, always wandering and without a home. But the places always sobered Mac because he knew how hard such lives would have been. Over the years, though, he'd found and he'd kept purple medicine bottles and boot buckles from the old places. Vonnie was a good rider, and Rusty knew her, and they liked to lead the train through the gloomy tree shade. The horses stepped quietly up the grassy slopes, past the wildflowers, along the faint trail they'd walked 100 times, their tails swishing silently, timed to the gait. When the bear sat up in the tall grass at the top of the draw, Mac thought he saw him rub his eyes like a man might in disbelief. It was a luxurious black bear, and he didn't stand or look alarmed. He sat and looked into the first horse's face. Rusty stopped short without rearing, but Vonnie went over the front of her saddle and fell. All the horses stopped, veterans. Mac knew that when Rusty turned riderless, all the horses would turn and start stepping down. He loved it that they knew not to run. They never ran, even on the last flat stretch near the ranch yard, even when the tourists urged them with their heels or their reins or any cowboy moves they had seen in films for years on end. Mac clucked, and Copper Bob eyed the bear and still approached. Vonnie was down, and Mac had to get down and lift her with an arm and lead the horse to turn away. The bear hadn't moved, watching this performance. At 20 paces, Mac boosted the girl up into his saddle and walked surely down behind the children's cavalcade, which was now headed inexorably toward the ranch, 2 miles away. Those who had been at the rear and hadn't seen the bear would be astonished and envious as they heard the story. But by supper, they would have their own tales of the close call and the huge beast. As they passed below the cabin shambles and onto the open hillside, Mac whistled, and Rusty stopped, and the line of riders stopped. "Are you okay?" Mac said. "It was a bear," Vonnie said. She was lit. They reached her horse, and Mac helped her down. "Let's see." She had skinned her wrist, and she pulled out her shirt and showed him where her waist was bruised, her belt full of dirt and grass. "I'm okay. Can we go back and get a picture?" Everybody had a camera. "Not today," he said. "That bear doesn't want his picture taken today." "Did he attack?" one of the kids said. "No," Mac said. "He was sleeping, and we woke him up." "Hibernating," one of the kids said. "No, not yet," Mac said. "Let's go down." "That bear was hibernating. Bears hibernate," the expert offered again. "Go, go," Max called, and the line of horses and riders began the walk home. It was the next morning that Mac had a problem. He woke to a face in his window, Copper Bob, and he pulled on his Levi's and boots and stepped onto the porch to find the dozen ranch horses all standing in the bunkhouse dooryard. Above, he could see the corral gate was open. With his boots unlaced and his shirt unbuttoned, he walked up there, clucking for Copper Bob, who led the others back into the enclosure. By the time he closed the rail gate, Mac knew that Rusty was missing. He saddled Copper Bob and rode over to the main house. Amarantha was in the kitchen, and the whole place smelled like her pastry, her blueberry pancakes. "Can you do the Dutch oven today?" he asked her. "I've got to go find a horse." "We can do that, Mac." She had 6 cast iron ovens and cooked with the young people a day or two every week over the fire pit behind the house. "Save me some pancakes," he said. He knew what it was, and he trotted Copper Bob up the ranching road and into the trees past the cabins. The dew was disturbed all the way, and he slowed in the aspen draw and saw where she had ridden up through and over the top. A bear chaser. Above, he came out of the trees and ascended the ridgeline. There was a game trail that traced the spine of the broad hill and led to the mountains ahead. "God damn it," he said, and followed it up. He could see Rusty's shoe prints in the clay trail periodically and horse shit as the trail dipped and rose again, now into the pines. He was also looking for bear sign, and there was none. In the old days, this is where they had baited bear with horse carcasses, walking an old horse up to the top and then shooting it right at the wall of trees, someplace they could watch from across the canyon, and yet the bear would approach unseen. They would wait, those pioneers, with their rifles. This top and all the way to the horizon, west and south, was federal land and always had been open to hunting in season. There were still constellations of horse skeletons drifting down a slope here and there. At the end of every season, Mac took 4 or 5 of the experienced riders out through the federal land and into the national forest, deadheading sometimes, learning the country. He liked being out beyond what he knew. Every year they came across butchered elk, chainsawed by poachers, the head and hindquarters taken months before the season. He banked his hatred for such characters, marked their trails when he could, but nothing came of it. Now Mac was in the pines, the trail narrow at points and moist, and he still saw where Rusty had tracked. He spent an hour like that in and out of the trees, breaking into the sage day, the 100-mile vistas, and then again into the green dark. "Goddamn girl," he said. At the saddle near the summit, he stopped and whistled 3 times, the way he could, the sharpest, loudest noise a human can make. Nothing. A little ahead, he saw where Rusty had left the trail and began to descend the far slope. Oh, shit. It was noon. The day was gone. He should have brought the walkie-talkies, his rifle, a lunch. "Girl," he called. "Rusty," he called. She was off the trail now, side-hilling the sage to who knows where. The way was steep and there were shale outcroppings. At least it was clear and sunny, but the day was gone. They'd never lost a girl before. They'd had blisters and splinters and hangovers and one broken arm when a boy fell off a corral fence, but no one had been lost. No one had perished. On the shady side of the mountain, 14 bighorn sheep ascended in bursts up the sandy mountainside, tame as barn goats, and obliterated the girl's trail. He rode out looking for the tracks and could not find them. She either went up or down, and now it was 3 o'clock. To hell with you. Mac knew that Rusty would know when the sun hit 4 to head for home, if she was still aboard. To hell with you and your camera, lady. This far from the ranch, there were 3 or 4 ways back, and Mac climbed up and over the summit and just guessed the stream trail and struck for that, 1.5 miles east. It was warm in the sun and fresh in the shadows climbing down. He was deadheading it, but he had been gifted with directional skill that even his father had remarked on. He hit the box creek and watered Copper Bob and then led him by the reins up to the log bridge he had built with his father 10 years before when he was 7. Before he saw the bridge, he heard Copper Bob snuffle, and there was Rusty tied to a tree. The girl was lying on the bridge, her arms out as if she had fallen from a great height. She was bare-legged, and her new brown corduroy jeans lay jumbled by her head. Mac and Copper Bob walked up. "You asleep?" She looked at him without moving her head, her face upside down to him. "I'm okay." She pulled her shirt tail down over her underwear. "I guess I'm lost," she said. He stood silent. The 2 horses nosed each other. He could see the angry chafe on her thighs. "What's your name again?" she said. I guess your bear got away. He climbed down and checked Rusty's saddle, which was secure in the bridle. You did a good job with this gear. I can't ride anymore, she said. I can't even touch my legs. We just need to get back and then you can soak, he told her. We have to go, though. She sat up and looked at her red legs. She stood and pulled her pants on tenderly. I can't even walk. Move through it, he said. We'll get you to the ranch road and I can bring the truck. How far is that? Up over there and down, 2 miles, a little more. She stepped stiffly to the horse and Mac helped her up. She moaned and said, "Where's that bear?" "Montana," he told her. "You scared that bear a good one jumping on him that way." She laughed and moaned as Rusty followed Copper Bob across the old wooden bridge and into the glade. "What's your name?" she said. There's just these 2 pages. That winter, she wrote him one letter from Brown, which told him her family was coming the second week in August. They had wanted to go to Martha's Vineyard, but she'd held out. She told him she had an appointment with a bear and signed it, Vonnie, music major, bear hunter. He spent July scouting the western hills and found them one at a time, 6 black bears, 2 cubs, 1 still cinnamon. The next month, when her family arrived, he stayed busy and the 2 young people ignored each other. There was a lot to do. The 3rd day at dawn, the day Amarantha was going to get out the Dutch ovens and make biscuits and omelets with the kids, he came to the porch rail of the bunkhouse and he could see the girl on the porch of her cottage. She stood and followed him to the corral. They rode 2 hours out the trail he had marked until they were in a hollow above the Valley of the Bears. They hadn't spoken. "You bring your camera?" he asked her. "I've got it." "Do you want to see these bears?" "Yes, I do. I came to see a bear. One will do." "I'm not sure I should let you at them," he said. "Oh, why's that?" "Because once you get your bear, you'll be done with me." She turned in her saddle, one hand on the back of it, and said, "I haven't even started with you." "You don't know my name." "I know your name." "Don't you say it." "Don't you say my name." "Do you keep your word?" "Yes, mister, I do." "Come along, then." He led her up through the trees to the overlook. Below the vale was meadow and aspen that gave way to pines. They wended down a rocky trail, staying above the open area. They sat, and the horses knew to be still. "Music," he said. "There's no money in it, but I'm a music major." "You play the piano?" "That and the clarinet." "I can't even play a guitar." "That's good. You'd be the whole package as a cowboy who played the guitar." A brown bear on all 4s walked out into the sunlight. "Is that the same bear?" A smaller bear appeared at the edge of the trees. "They're all the same bear." She lifted her lens Nikon out of its case and began to take pictures. As the camera sneezed, the bears lifted their heads to look up. "Yes, it's the same bear." She turned and took Mac's picture. When she had packed her camera away and lifted it behind her back, she said to him, "Thanks for this." He reined Copper Bob around in the narrow trail and started back. His father came out to the tack room that afternoon and stood in the sunlit doorway. "You're doing something?" "Yes, sir, I am. Not much, but I am." "Do you know what you're doing?" "No, sir, I don't." "Are you going by your gut?" "By something." "Okay, then," his father said. "Be careful of yourself. Remember Jude?" Jude had been their first hand, a drunk, always cutting himself or losing things with bad knots. He finally fell from a horse and put an eye out on a fence post. "I'll be careful," Mac said. He stood and faced his father. "This isn't a cliche, and it won't be. It's either nothing or something, but I'll be careful. Thank you very much."
I'm Sherry Devlin. 28 years ago this month, I walked into the Missoulian newsroom and encountered an extraordinary group of writers, remarkable not only for their skill as storytellers, but for the generosity with which they shared their collective advice. And so came my first lessons as a newspaper reporter, living and working in Missoula, Montana. From columnist Steve Smith came these words. In Montana, Sherry, everything and everybody is connected. From copy editor John Stromness came this. Human beings, great stories are full of living, breathing, walking, talking human beings. And from D. McNamer, who wrote the most perfectly realized feature stories I had ever read in a newspaper, and who introduced me to hot pepper cheeseburgers at the Mo Club and the Swing Shift Bowling League, came this. Listen, Sherry, we've got to find some men before winter sets in. All important advice. What I learned most from Dee McNamer, though, came from watching her write those incredible feature stories. Dee's sentences had rhythm. Her stories had a shape. She noticed everything and wrote it all down. She asked why. She spoke the truth. She wrote with courage. She took us, her readers, along with her on interviews and adventures, and we were always sorry when they came to an end. When Dee left full-time newspapering, I missed those stories, but not for long, because the novelist Deirdre McNamer was soon on my bookshelf, first with Rima in the Weeds, then One Sweet Quarrel, My Russian, and this summer, Red Rover. She's kept writing for newspapers as well, telling stories of life and politics in Montana to the rest of the country, and opinion pieces and essays for the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, Miami Herald, and the New Yorker and Outside magazines. Tonight, we're privileged to hear Dee read from Red Rover, which began as an effort to write the story of her dad and uncle, then became the fictional tale of Aidan and Neil Tierney, boys who imagined themselves as Argentine gauchos while riding across the high plains of Montana, then men who served their country in the Second World War with eventually disastrous consequences for Aidan. It is the story of life's abiding disappointments and of the courage with which human beings struggle to wrangle meaning from great tragedy. It is a story of faith, tested and enduring. The reviews of Red Rover this summer have been rave. Richard Ford wrote this, Miss McNamer's novel is vividly observed and original in its conception. She's a wonderfully smart and surprising sentence writer, and the burnish on this work has left not a word out of place. This is the novel as storytelling, and it is of a very high order. In tomorrow morning's New York Times, literary critic Sven Burkitz will provide the exclamation mark with these words. Red Rover is suggestively compressed in its way of paying out revelations, which steadily gather mass and shadows. Indeed, the means of presentation, the structural logic of the novel, are as much a part of its meaning as is its thematic suggestions. McNamer's way of combining her far-flung episodes effectively triangulates the unknowable event at the heart of the novel. We work out much of the drama through a kind of echolocation. Ultimately, Red Rover is no fashionable, effect-driven assemblage, but a deeply sourced imagining of circumstance that replicates the complicated process of psychological discovery. The beauty of this novel is that McNamer's readers can derive from it a deeper understanding of the interconnectedness of all lives, an understanding that reaches each of us differently according to our own needs. It is with great honor and humility that I introduce to you the novelist, Deirdre McNamer.
Thank you, Sherry, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you all for being here. I'd like to give a special thanks to Kim Anderson, who just lends this tone of elan and lightness to the whole proceedings, and so I'd like to give a hand for Kim right now. I'm going to read a war chapter from this novel. It's the second chapter of the book. It is Saipan at the end of 1944 and at the beginning of 1945. 2 nights before his first time out, Neil Tierney had the dream that had scared him so badly when he had it as a child. A recurring one in which a series of faces passed slowly down a mirror, silent as snow, none of them anyone he knew or could remember. Just that, but there was terror in it. He woke to an air raid, everyone grabbing clothes and running for the door, then falling face down as a plane roared over, guns rattling. Some broke for the ditches and shelters. Neil rolled himself under the metal table where they played poker at night. Another whine becoming a deadly roar, and the rain of bullets again, and then a few seconds later, a deep explosion up on the plateau where the big bombers were. That was a fuel tank going, a long pause, and then another different boom. That was probably the Zeke. He closed his eyes and watched himself fall asleep for a minute or two, his good trick. When it was quiet, a column of smoke climbed 1,000 or more feet from a B-29 burning on its hard stand. The others, 100 of them up there, stood silhouetted in the moonlight. They were beautiful, huge things with their long, tapered wings and sleek bodies, silver thoroughbreds that made other bombers look like burros. They waited up there in their long rows like patient animals as the men down on the flat milled around in skivvies and bare feet, smoking, sweating, shaking their heads, watching the long white pincers of the searchlights. A wire of siren reached them from somewhere up on the far bluff where the colored gunners lived. Neil's bombardier, a thin, dark-haired kid they called Dante for his poetic ways, ran up to tell him about the Zeke that the gunners on the bluff had shot down. There were parts of the pilot all over the runway, he said, white-faced. They looked like seared roasts. They were, those parts, the first dead person he'd ever seen. All the B-29 crews had arrived on the island during the previous couple of weeks, ready to commence long-distance air war against the Empire. Already, Neil had learned to stay away from Dante as much as he could because the man thought too hard about everything and seemed compelled to register his reactions to each and all. He was the one who'd told the rest of the crew every detail he knew about the suicides of the island's Japanese civilians, thousands of them leaping from Marpy Point after the invasion. And he was the one who knew about the Marine who'd been swimming in the lagoon and come face to face with a dead woman in a polka dot blouse, her lamp black hair snaking behind. The rest of them had to shut him up on a regular basis, and then he'd grab his notebook and start writing, or fall silent with his feelings all over his face. He made you nervous because he seemed so alert, he lit up like an electric bulb, a beacon for trouble to find. Neil told him he didn't want to hear the details of the dead Jap. He was glad the bastard got it, sounding more curt than he'd intended. Dante went inside to his cot where he sat tailor style, a shock of black hair falling over his beaky nose, and scribbled in his notebook. Then he left the Quonset, ambling into the full moon night, while Neil pretended to write a letter and watched him go. The next day, retrieving cigarettes from his trunk, Neil found the Quonset empty, a corner of Dante's notebook edged from his pillow. Surprising himself, he pulled it out and read the last entry. After the rocket and the roar, water-falling moonlight upon Milton's smoke and stir of this dim spot which men call Earth. The silent stars go by. When it came night, the white waves paced to and fro in the moonlight, and the wind brought the sound of the great sea's voice to the men on shore, and they felt that they could then be interpreters. Thank you, wide-winged crane. But interpreters, how pleased do I interpret this? The question gave Neil a small, cold feeling, and he quickly replaced the notebook. The next morning, they were rousted early to dress, eat, and board the trucks that took them to the line. Time to fly. Neil carried in a slim wallet in his jacket a photo of his older brother. It was taken about the time that Aidan requested hazardous duty with the FBI and got sent undercover to Argentina. Red Rover, send Aidan right over. Neil sometimes thought as he studied the photograph. Aidan wore an expression that was both somber and wry, and that Neil recognized as well as he did his own face. There was a certain gravitas in it, reinforced by Aidan's intelligent eyes, his imperturbable good looks, but also something buoyantly alive, connected, and curious. An intense alertness, like Dante's, Neil sometimes thought, but without the wavery emotional edge. Aidan had signed the photo in his distinct up and down hand. 10/10 to you, hermano. One by one, the engines roared thunderously to life. 10/10, Neil thought, as he taxied Z-Square 7 into the lineup. He pulled into position for takeoff, stopped, and pushed hard on the brake pedals. The starter signaled them to increase the RPMs. Lewis, his co-pilot, set the wing flaps. Bond, the engineer, increased the fuel-to-air mix ratio to auto-rich and placed the engine's cowl flaps at trail. Neil and Lewis both pushed the throttles forward slowly, and as the RPMs and manifold pressures reached military power, the plane began to vibrate and shake. Neil watched the starter and the tower. Lewis monitored the instruments. The starter gave the forward wave, and the tower flashed the green light. He released the brakes and began the heavy roll. 99 feet of plane, 11 men, 70 tons. Fuel enough for the trip, but just, and the bomb load adding 10 tons to the plane's theoretical capacity. Lewis called out airspeeds. Neil gently fed in enough left rudder to compensate for the torque in that direction. There was something in it of the headstrong racehorse wanting to turn a circle before moving into the gate, and you had to pull her to the right to line her out, to really run. Now they were pulling takeoff power, and the plane 30 seconds ahead of them was staggering into the air. The tower flashed by. Lewis called out numbers. 135. Go, Neil whispered, full throttle. And go, he whispered again as Lewis called out 145, and the edge of the island charged toward them. He eased back on the stick, but not before they knocked out a couple of lights at the end of the concrete. The last figure on land was the priest in the flapping cassock who made a big cross in the air as each plane roared and wobbled into the sky. Gear up, flaps up, 500 feet per minute rate of climb, and they had begun the 1,500-mile trip to Tokyo. The water became metal, white-flecked floor far below, talc on steel. They pressurized the cabin to climb into the icy skies, and then the crew played cards and ate canned turkey sandwiches in shirt sleeves in their luxury liner. The formation was loose. They could see Z-Square 8 off in the distance and the glints of several others below. Neil checked the bearings, and Lewis took over while he unwrapped his sandwich. He chewed slowly, studying the sky through the latticed cockpit. He could see in every direction and be so seen. They were so large and available to the enemy, so silver and long and heavy, with their little heads up in the glass, the brains of the thing. He closed his eyes, trying to rest them before whatever awaited them. He adamantly did not consider in detail what might lie ahead. They churned on, 5 miles above the water now. He ate, he flew, he catnapped. 7 hours passed. When he opened his eyes, there ahead on the horizon was the snow-topped cone of Mount Fuji. He blinked. It was perfectly symmetrical, perfectly beautiful with its cape of white. The clouds around its base unlinked it from the earth, and it floated like some vision of ultimate order and light. Neil felt a twang of dissonance. How could something that looked like that, so ancient and serene, be the initial point of a bombing run? The mountain was out of time and on to its blue and snowy self. They were boys playing war in her sky. Lewis swore at it. There it was, the signal to go in together, and they were straggling way behind the formation, not ready at all. They all scrambled into their flak vests, and Neil pulled takeoff power to try to catch the big birds that were moving in a slow dream, a glide, around the west side of Fuji. He cut to the right of the mountain to catch them, and now there were bursts of flak, black flowers blooming in the air as they moved in with the other planes, in formation now and halfway from Fuji to the target. Through a bank of thick clouds they flew, so tightly that Neil could feel the slipstream from his wing plane, that little tug. And then, as if the enemy had simply been waiting for them to arrange themselves as targets, the clouds evaporated and screaming Zeeks flew out of the sun through the long silver ships, guns blazing, 60, 70 of them all over the sky, flying at every angle but right side up. One of them barreled past in a vertical bank 2 wing lengths away. Everyone was on the interphone at once, shouting positions and hits and incoming. Lewis pulled the toggle switch to drop the bombs. When the bombs didn't drop, Dante hit the salvo. Nothing. The tail gunner's squeaky yell came over the phone then, sounding panicky. Tails out, and then the steady clank of the landing gear going down and the sound of hard rocks thrown at them, the wild clatter of them. Neil yelled at Lewis to flip the up switch. Ahead of them, the lead ship with 2 colonels aboard streamed smoke from both engines on its right side. Fighters fell upon it, and it hesitated, then dropped like a toy from a sleepy child's hand. A Betty flew straight at them. The gunner hit him, and the plane exploded in front of their left wing. The engine flew under the wing. The fuselage, with its goggled pilot, flew over, so close they could have touched the boy's face. And it was over. The fighters went away as suddenly as they'd come, and Z-7 headed out to sea, the cone of Fuji on the horizon behind it, into the quick, amazing silence. The huge sun was beginning to drift down. They flew alone as the sky dimmed. They took stock. Tail turret out, trim tab tables gone, C1 partially out, gear doors down. They managed to release the bombs, drop them in the drink, and tried to take up a course for home. The plane was full of holes. Radar was picking up nothing. One engine's RPMs were stuck at a screaming 2,300. The jammed bomb doors produced drag, but they were out over the long water. Seaver, the navigator, reported that the best guessed ETA and the end of the fuel were the same, too close to call. They flew on an assumed course. They talked about how they'd ditch. They flew. After a few hours, the radio operator got a faint signal that told him they were on course for Saipan. It disappeared. An hour later, he got another. Lining up star shots with his sextant, Seaver looked like a mythical sailor, though his face was a baby's. A baby-faced 19-year-old, but he had a crisp, assured way of reporting the data. The shots didn't line up, then they did. Saipan began to come in very faintly on command radio. The fuel gauges hovered near empty. Neil set 21:30, a half hour away, as the time to prepare to ditch. They flew in the noisy darkness, all attention on the fuel and the clock and the frantic calculations, time and fuel. A huge, damaged plane, alone and star-dazzled, its half-wrecked instruments aglow. The shrieking, stuck engine, the thump of blood in the ears. At 21:30, he had the crew throw all the loose equipment from the bomb bay and reminded himself of the rules. Approach upwind across the waves if the winds are strong, along the top of the swell if they aren't. Don't glide in, stall in to reduce the impact. He'd need to control the descent if it happened, and he needed the last fuel to do that, or they would just fall out of the sky to be broken on the water. The Saipan signal got louder. Seaver estimated on the basis of his star fixes that they'd reach land in 40 minutes. Bond, the engineer, estimated that they run out of fuel in 20 minutes. Neil thought about the gauges, which were not absolutely reliable at low readings. He thought about ditching and how he'd once helped search for a ditched plane, how the Pacific grew immeasurably large when you were looking for something on its surface. It flashed its millions of mirrors and stretched itself out with a glittery malevolence. Keep your head. Adrenaline skittered down the surface of his arms. He felt for the wallet inside his flak vest, touched it to feel his brother Aiden's face. You didn't just set her down the best you could and wait for a friendly sub to come bubbling up. You might crack up on impact and sink and die, or be out there in rafts, flashing pathetic signal mirrors, their light lost among the ocean's own light. You might set off flares and try to get a weak balloon to lift 200 feet of transmitter antenna into the air. You might have lost the handle of your generator in the crash. You might be listening to the searchers, droning through the blue, peering down at you with blind eyes. A 20-minute gap, more fuel or fewer miles, and the gap would shut. But how would they know what was happening? Split the difference. The distress signal would go out in 10 minutes at 2200. They'd get as close to the island as they could before they went down. And then at 2150, the miracle of lights, a prickle of ground lights, and poking up through them, the skinny fingers of the searchlights. There she is, they all shouted, and Dante pressed forward in his bombardier's bubble as if he were pulling the big ship himself. Down, down, down. Neil pushed the right rudder and dropped the left wing so they side-slipped down the long sky, fast to the tiny island below. They roared over the field and called the tower. The operator told them to land on the emergency runway. Neil threw down the gear and felt a lurch run through him as the board showed only the right wheel green-lighted and locked. The left wheel and nose showed red lights. That meant they were either not down or not locked. But the wiring was half shot up, so who knew if the lights were right? He shouted through the interphone at the gunners, and they said the left wheel seemed to be in place. He yelled at them all to prepare for a crash landing, and he took one more circle of the field, the huge plane, light and wieldy, without gas or bombs, and he landed it on the right wheel. They ran like that, a one-legged skate, and he slowly tipped down on the left, which held. As they lost speed, the nose gradually descended. "Come on, baby," Dante murmured. He was sitting now behind the pilots with the radio operator. The wheel hit and collapsed, pulling the nose down to the ground. Dante shrieked as the gun turret started up through the floor where he sat. He scrambled toward the nose, but the cone started to collapse, so he scrambled back, shoving himself into a niche behind Lewis with the radio man. The plane had stopped. The tail was high in the air, the nose crushed. "Out," Neil shouted. "Out, out, out," and they scrambled. They watched the tail gunner perch for a moment before the 30-foot jump and roll when he hit. Two of them lifted him up and hopped him away from the plane, and it was done. The next night, the whole crew sat on damp sandbags watching Laura, the new movie on the outdoor screen. They smoked, and the smoke mingled with light island rain, a mist that softened everything, including the young, stripped faces of the men, as they let the movie take them away from their patch of coral with its wild, bright birds deep in the leaves, its encircling lagoon, and all its fresh ghosts. And so you go back to your cot after a movie with carpets and martinis and Gene Tierney. You go back under a huge moon, walking the patch of coral, and outside the Quonset is a big Thor washing machine and a clothesline with socks and shorts and shirts floating in the moonlight, a clothesline like your mom's. And near it, the scratching of a little garden put in by Dante, who tends it daily. And there is his half-finished attempt also to make a chair out of a packing crate. That was the first part of the air war, when they flew in at 5 miles of altitude, aimed for a military target, and hoped they didn't encounter the huge, terrifying winds up there that could skate a 99-foot plane sideways like a skipped stone. Hoped, too, that the fighters that came after them like harpies were at the limit of their altitude, that they couldn't find a way to come at them from above. That was the first phase, and not so successful in military terms. There were bugs in the big, sleek planes, a lot of missed targets, trouble with formations. No one had ever done this before, made 3,000-mile day trips to run through hell for half an hour or an hour, and if you were very lucky, crawl into your own cot that night, an ocean away from the trouble. Away from the Black Corridor, as Dante called it. By Christmas, 1 plane out of 4 was gone. Shot down, mechanical trouble, ditched, gone. The numbermen had the odds, 6 or 7 missions, and you could expect not to make the next. And the allowable maximum per man was 35. As the losses mounted, the men felt their individual visions of a future apart from war grow vague and naive. All their attention now on the next mission and how they might endure the days and hours before it. Dante stopped tending his little garden. He wrote less and less. He played as much baseball as he could, standing out there in the sun for 3 and 4 hours at a stretch, to bat, run, and throw until he could feel himself to be exhausted. They stopped building chairs out of crates. They stopped reading books, most of them, preferring magazines which don't await your return. Some of them wrote letters to everyone they could think of, and some wrote none at all. And then the new general came in and lowered their bombing altitude by a mile, and it felt as if the last margin of safety had been taken from them on the bet that they would hit targets more accurately, though even more of them wouldn't live to tell about it. 2 weeks later, he ordered everyone way down to 5,000 feet, and the B-29s were going in without gunners to firebomb the country to cinders. Now it was napalm, rivers of fire, a program of annihilation, soldiers and civilians alike. The roar of burning paper houses, sending updrafts so powerful they shot the bombers hundreds of feet straight up. A war that did not bear thinking about. Dante abandoned his journal and began to write a letter he never tried to finish. For his mother, he said, but he never signed off or mailed it. "I'm not afraid now," he told Seaver one night in the officers' club. "It's just that it's so hellishly stupid, all of it, wouldn't you say?" A week or so later, the skin on Neil's face erupted in an infection, a nasty one, probably from the oxygen mask. He was hospitalized and his crew was broken up. Dante went to Z Square 19 and flew 3 missions. On one, the co-pilot was shot and bled to death halfway back to Saipan. Neil's old engineer, Bond, came to his hospital room one day to give him the next news. He stood at the foot of the iron bed, and the island light through the moving window shades made his face seem to fold and unfold. Bond's new plane and crew were flying wing with Dante's, so close he could see the poet's young hockey face in the bubble. Suddenly, the right wing of Dante's plane was on fire, the engines belching smoke, and it began to drop. Bond's plane tried to stay with them, shielding, but the other fell faster. Dante looked at him, he said, straight at him, and he raised his hand in a wave and held it there. An almost jaunty wave, Bond said. And then Dante was down and gone. Thank you.
James Lee Burke was born in Houston, Texas in 1936 and grew up on the Texas-Louisiana Gulf Coast. He attended Southwestern Louisiana Institute and later received a BA and an MA degree from the University of Missouri. Over the years, he worked as a landman for Sinclair Oil, pipeliner, land surveyor, newspaper reporter, college English professor, social worker on Skid Row in Los Angeles, clerk for Louisiana Employment Service, and an instructor in the U.S. Job Corps. He and his wife Pearl met in graduate school, and they have been married for 46 years. They have 4 children, Jim Jr., an assistant U.S. attorney, Andre, a school psychologist, Pamela, a TV ad producer, and Alifair, a law professor and novelist who has 3 novels out with Henry Holt Publishing. Burke's work has been awarded an Edgar Award twice for Best Crime Novel of the Year. 2 of his novels have been made into motion pictures, and a third is slated to premiere next year, In the Electric Mist. And I was so excited to read that it's starring Tommy Lee Jones. And I hope this means that there are going to be many sequels. I thought Jim Burke, Dave Robichaux, and Tommy Lee Jones. It sounds pretty good to me. Jim's novel, The Lost Get Back Boogie, was rejected 111 times before it was published. That was during a period of 9 years. Once it was published by the Louisiana State University, it was nominated then for a Pulitzer Prize. Jim has published over 25 novels. I know to all of us, we consider him our treasure. We are so glad that he makes Montana his home at least part of the year. And to those of us who know him, I think even better, he's to us a prince of a man. It's my honor to introduce James Lee Burke.
Wow, thank you. That was a wonderful, that wasn't an introduction, it was early canonization, I think. That was a wonderful compliment, thank you, and thank you for your kind reception. This story is titled Jesus Out to Sea, and it was published originally in Esquire magazine, and it became the inception for a novel titled The Tin Roof Blowdown. Both the novel and the story deal with Hurricane Katrina. I grew up in the big sleazy uptown off Magazine amongst live oak trees and gangsters and musicians and bougainvillea the Christian Brothers said was put there to remind us of Christ's blood in the Garden of Gethsemane. My best friends were Tony and Miles Cardo. Their mother made her living shampooing the hair of corpses in a funeral parlor on Tchoupitoulas. I was with them the afternoon they found a box of human arms someone at the Tulane Medical School left by the campus incinerator. Tony stuffed the arms in a big bag of crushed ice, and the next day at 5 o'clock, when all the employees from the cigar factory were loading onto the St. Claude streetcar, him and Miles hung the arms from hand straps and the backs of seats all over the car. People started screaming their heads off and clawing their ways out of the doors. A big fat black guy climbed out the window and crashed on top of a snowball cart. Tony and Miles, those guys were a riot. Tony was known as the Johnny Watt of the Mafia because he had a flopper on him that looked like a 15-inch chunk of radiator hose. All 3 of us joined the crotch and went to Vietnam, but Tony was the one who couldn't deal with some stuff he saw in a ville not far from Chu Lai. Tony had the Purple Heart and 2 Bronze Stars, but volunteered to work in the mortuary so he wouldn't have to see things like that anymore. Miles and me came home and played music, including gigs at Sharky Banana's Dream Room on Bourbon Street. Tony brought Vietnam back to New Orleans and carried it with him wherever he went. I wish Tony hadn't gotten messed up in the war, and I wished he hadn't become a criminal either. He was a good guy and had a good heart. So did Miles. That's why we were pals. Somehow, if we stayed together, we knew we'd never die. Remember Rumbles? When I was a kid, the gangs were Irish or Italian. Projects like the Iberville were all white, but the kids in them were the toughest I ever knew. They used to steal skulls out of the crypts in the St. Louis cemeteries and skate down North Villeray Street with the skulls mounted on broomsticks. In the 10th grade, a bunch of them took my saxophone away from me on the streetcar. Tony went into the project by himself, made a couple of guys wet their pants, then walked into this kid's apartment while the family was eating supper and came back out with my sax. Nobody said squat. Back in the 1950s and 60s, criminals had a funny status in New Orleans. There were understandings between the NOPD and the Italian crime family that ran all the vice. Any hooker who cooperated with a Murphy sting on a John in the quarter got a bus ticket back to Snakes Naval, Texas. Her pimp went off a rooftop. A guy who jackrolled tourists or old people got his wheels broken with batons and was thrown out of a moving car by the parish line. Nobody was sure what happened to child molesters. They never got found. But the city was a good place. You ever stroll across Jackson Square in the early morning when the sky was pink and you could smell the salt on the wind and the coffee and pastry from the Café du Monde? Miles and me used to sit in with Louis Prima and Sam Butera. That's no jive, man. We'd blow until sunrise, then eat a bag full of hot beignets and sip cafe au lait on a steel bench under the palms while the sidewalk artists were setting up their easels and paints in the square. The mist and sunlight in the trees looked like cotton candy. That was before the city went down the drain and before Miles and me went down the drain with it. Crack cocaine hit the projects in the early 80s. Black kids all over the downtown area reminded me of characters in Night of the Living Dead. They loved 9mm automatics, too. The Gipper whacked federal aid to the city by half, and the murder rate in New Orleans became the highest in the United States. We got to see a lot of David Duke. He had his face remodeled with plastic surgery and didn't wear a bed sheet or a Nazi armband anymore, so the white flight crowd treated him like Jefferson Davis and almost elected him governor. New Orleans became a free fire zone. Miles and me drifted around the Gulf Coast and smoked a lot of weed and pretended we were still jazz musicians. I'm not being honest here. It wasn't just weed. We moved right on up to the Full Tilt Boogie and joined the Spoon and Eyedropper Club. Tony threw us both in a Catholic hospital and told this 300-pound Mother Superior to beat the shit out of us with her rosary beads. One of these 15-decade jobs if we tried to check out before we were clean. But all these things happened before the storm hit New Orleans. After the storm passed, nothing Miles and Tony and me had done together seemed very important. The color of the water is chocolate brown with the greenish blue shine on the surface like gasoline, except it's not gasoline. All the stuff from the broken sewage mains has settled on the bottom. When people try to walk in it, dark clouds swell up around their chest and arms. I've never smelled anything like it. The sun is a yellow flame on the brown water. It must be more than 95 degrees now. At dawn, I saw a black woman on the next street, one that's lower than mine, standing on top of a car roof. She was huge with rolls of fat on her like a stack of inner tubes. She was wearing a purple dress that had floated up over her waist, and she was waving at the sky for help. Miles rowed a boat from the bar he owns on the corner, and the two of us went over to where the car roof was maybe 6 feet underwater by the time we got there. The black lady was gone. I keep telling myself a United States Coast Guard chopper lifted her off. Those Coast Guard guys are brave, except I haven't heard any choppers in the last hour. Miles and me tie the boat to a vent on my roof and sit down on the roof spine and wait. Miles takes out a picture of him and Tony and me together at the old amusement park on Lake Pontchartrain. We're all wearing jeans and T-shirts and duck-ass haircuts, smiling, giving the camera the thumbs up. You can't believe how handsome both Tony and Miles were, with patent leather black hair and Italian faces like Rudolph Valentino. Nobody would have ever believed Miles would have put junk in his arm, or Tony would have come back from Vietnam with helicopter blades still thropping inside his head. Miles brought 4 1-gallon jugs of tap water with him in his boat, which puts us in a lot better shape than most of our neighbors. This is the 9th ward of Orleans Parish. Only 2 streets away, I can see the tops of palm trees sticking out of the water. I can also see houses that are completely covered. Last night, I heard people beating the roofs from inside the attics in those houses. I have a feeling the sounds of those people will never leave my sleep, that the inside of my head is going to be like the inside of Tony's. The church up the street is made out of pink stucco and has bougainvillea growing up one wall. The water is up to the little bell tower now, and the big cross in the breezeway with the hand-carved wooden Jesus on it is deep underwater. The priest tried to get everybody to leave the neighborhood, but a lot of people didn't have cars, or at least cars they could trust. And because it was still 2 days till payday, most people didn't have any money either. So the priest said he was staying too. An hour later, the wind came off the Gulf and began to peel the face off South Louisiana. This morning, I saw the priest float past the top of a live oak tree. He was on his stomach, his clothes puffed with air, his arms stretched out by his sides like he was looking for something down in the tree. The levees are busted and a gas main has caught fire under the water, and the flames have set fire to the roof of a 2-story house on the next block. Miles is pretty disgusted with the whole business. When this is over, I'm moving to Arizona, he says. No, you won't, I say. Watch me. This is the big sleazy. It's Guatemala. We don't belong anywhere else, I said. He doesn't try to argue with that one. When we were kids, we played with guys who had worked for King Oliver and Kid Oray and Bunk Johnson. Miles on the drums, me on tenor sax. Flip Phillips and Joe Jones probably didn't consider us challenges to their careers, but we were respected just the same. A guy who could turn his sticks into a white blur at the famous door is going to move to a desert and play Sing, Sing, Sing for the Gila Monsters? That Miles breaks me up. His hair is still black, combed back in strings on his scalp, the skin on his arms white as a baby's, puckered more than it should be, but the veins are still blue and not collapsed or scarred from the needlework we did on ourselves. Miles is a tough guy, but I know what he's thinking. Tony and him and me started out together, then Tony got into the life. And I mean into the life, man. Drugs, whores, union racketeering, loan sharking, maybe even popping a couple of guys. But no matter how many crimes he may have committed, Tony held on to the one good thing in his life, a little boy who was born crippled. Tony loved that little boy. Thinking about Tony, I say. Got a card from him last week. The postmark was Mexico City. He didn't sign it, but I know it's from him, Miles says. He lifts his strap undershirt off his chest and wipes a drop of sweat from the tip of his nose. His shoulders look dry and hard, the skin stretched tight on the bone. They're just starting to powder with sunburn. He takes a drink of water from one of our milk drugs, rationing himself, swallowing each sip slowly. I thought you said Tony was in Argentina, I say. So he moves around. He's got a lot of legitimate businesses now. He's got to keep an eye on them and move around a lot. Yeah, Tony was always hands-on, I say, avoiding his eyes. You know what death smells like? fish blood that someone has buried in a garden of night-blooming flowers, or a field mortuary during the monsoon season in a tropical country right after the power generators have failed, or the buckets that the sugar worker whores used to pour into the rain ditches behind their cribs on Sunday morning. If that odor comes to you on the wind or in your sleep, you tend to take special notice of your next sunrise. I start looking at the boat and the water that goes to the horizon in all directions. My butt hurts from sitting on the spine of the house, and the shingles burn the palms of my hands. Somewhere up in Orleans Parish, I know there's higher ground, an elevated highway sticking up on pilings, high-rise apartment buildings with roofs choppers can land on. Miles already knows what I'm thinking. Wait till dark, he says. Why, I say. There won't be as many people who want the boat, he says. I look at him and feel ashamed for both of us. A hurricane is supposed to have a beginning and an end. It tears the earth up, fills the air with flying trees and bricks and animals and sometimes even people. It makes you roll up into a ball under a table and pray till drops of blood pop on your brow. Then it goes away and lets you clean up after it, like somebody pulled a big prank on the whole town. But this one doesn't work that way. It's killing in stages. I see a diapered black baby in a tree that's only a green smudge under the water's surface. I can smell my neighbors in their attic. The odor is like a rat that is drowned in a bucket of water inside a superheated garage. A white guy floating by on an inner tube has a battery-powered radio propped on his stomach and tells us snipers have shot a policeman in the head and killed 2 fish and wildlife officers. Gangbangers have turned over a boat trying to rescue patients from Charity Hospital. The Superdome and the Convention Center are layered with feces and are without water or food for thousands of people who are seriously pissed off. A bunch of them tried to walk into Jefferson Parish and were turned back by cops who fired shotguns over their heads. The white flight crowd doesn't need any extra problems. The guy in the inner tube says a deer was on the second floor of a house on the next street and an alligator ate it. That's supposed to be entertaining? You guys got anything to eat up there? The guy in the inner tube asked. Yeah, a whole buffet. I had it catered from Gala right before the storm, Miles says to him. That Miles. Toward evening, the sun goes behind the clouds and the sky turns purple and is full of birds. The Coast Guard choppers are coming in low over the water, the downdraft streaking a trough across the surface, the rescue guys swinging from cables like anybody could do what they do. They're taking children and old and sick people out first and flying without rest. I love those guys. But Miles and me both know how it's going to go. We've seen it before, the slick coming out of a molten sun right across the canopy, automatic weapons fire wanging off the airframe, wounded grunts waiting in an LZ that North Vietnamese regulars are about to overrun. You can't get everybody home, Chuck. That's just the way it slides down the pipe sometimes. A guy sitting on his chimney with Walkman ears on says the President of the United States flew over and looked down from his plane at us. Then he went on to Washington. I don't think the story is true, though. If the president was really in that plane, he would have landed and tried to find out what kind of shape we were in. He would have gone to the Superdome and the Convention Center and talked to the people there and told them the country was behind them. The wind suddenly blows from the south, and I can smell salt and rain and the smell fish make when they're spawning. I think maybe I'm dreaming. Tony is coming, Miles says out of nowhere. I look at his face, swollen with sunburn, the salt caked on his shoulders. I wonder if Miles hasn't pulled loose from his own tether. Tony knows where we are, he says. He's got money and power and connections. We're the mean machine from magazine. That's what he always said. The mean machine stomps ass and takes names. For a moment, I almost believe it. Then I feel all the bruises and fatigue and the screaming sounds of the wind blowing my neighborhood apart drain out of me like black water sucking down through the bottom of a giant sink. My head sinks on my chest and I fall asleep, even though I know I'm surrendering my vigilance at the worst possible time. I see Tony standing in the door of a Jolly Green, the wind flattening his clothes against his muscular physique. I see the Jolly Green coming over the houses, loading everyone on board, dropping bright yellow inflatable life rafts to people, showering water bottles and sea rats down to people who had given up hope. But I'm dreaming. I wake up at the start. The sun is gone from the sky. The water's still rising. The surface carpeted with trash. The painter to our boat hangs from the air vent, cut by a knife. Our boat is gone. Our water jugs along with it. The night is long and hot, the stars veiled with smoke from fires vandals have set in the garden district. My house is settling, window glass snapping from the frames as the floor buckles and the nails in the joist make sounds like somebody tightening piano wire on a wood peg. It's almost dawn now. Miles is sitting on the ridge of the roof, his knees splayed on the shingles like a human clothespin, staring at a speck on the southern horizon. The wind shifts, and I smell an odor like night-blooming flowers in a garden that has been fertilized with fish blood. Hey, Miles, I say. Yeah, he says impatiently, not wanting to be distracted from the speck on the horizon. We played with Louis Prima. He said you were as good as Krupa. We blew out the doors at the Dream Room with Johnny Scat. We jammed with Sharky and Jack Teagarden. How many people can say that? It's a Jolly Green. Look at it, he says. I don't want to listen to him. I don't want to be drawn into his delusions. I don't want to be scared, but I am. Where? I ask. Right there in that band of light between the sea and sky. Look at the shape. It's a Jolly Green. It's Tony, man. I told you. The aircraft in the south draws nearer like the evening star, winking and then disappearing and then winking again. But it's not a Jolly Green, it's a passenger plane, and it goes straight overhead, the windows lighted, the jet engines splitting the air with a dirty roar. Miles's face, his eyes rolled upward as he watches the plane disappear, makes me think of John the Baptist's head on a plate. He's going to come with an airboat, mark my word, he says. The DEA killed him, Miles, I say. No, man, I told you, I got a postcard. It was Tony. Don't buy government lies. They blew him out of the water off Veracruz. No way, man, not Tony. He got out of the life and had to stay off the radar. He's coming back. I lie on my back, the nape of my neck cupped restfully on the roof cap, small waves rolling up my loins and chest like a warm blanket. I no longer think about the chemicals and oil and feces and body parts that the water may contain. I remind myself that we came out of primeval soup and that nothing in the earth's composition should be strange or objectionable to us. I look at the smoke drifting across the sky and feel the house jolt under me. Then it jolts again, and I know that maybe Miles is right about seeing Tony, but not in the way he thought. When I look hard enough into the smoke and the stars behind it, I see New Orleans the way it was when we were kids. I see the fog blowing off the Mississippi levee and pooling in the streets, the Victorian houses sticking out of the mist like ships on the Gulf. I see the green-painted streetcars clanging up and down the neutral ground on St. Charles, and the tunnel of live oaks you ride through all the way down to the Carrollton district by the levee. The pink and purple neon tubing on the Katz and Betzoff drugstores glows like colored smoke inside the fog, and music is everywhere, like it's trapped under a big glass dome. The brass funeral bands marching down Magazine, old black guys blowing out the bricks in Preservation Hall, dance orchestras playing on hotel roofs along Canal Street. That's the way it was back then. You woke in the morning to the smell of gardenias, the electric smell of the streetcars, chicory coffee, and stone that has turned green with lichen. The light was always filtered through trees, so it was never harsh, and flowers bloomed year-round. New Orleans was a poem, man, a song in your heart that never died. I only got one regret. Nobody ever bothered to explain why nobody came for us. When Miles and me are way out to sea, I want to ask him that. Then a funny thing happens. Floating right along next to us is the big wood carving of Jesus on his cross from the stucco church at the end of my street. He's on his back, his arms stretched out, the waves sliding across his skin. The holes in his hands look just like the petals from the bougainvillea on the church wall. I ask him what happened back there. He looks at me a long time, like maybe I'm a real slow learner. Yeah, I dig your meaning. That's exactly what I thought, I say, not wanting to show how dumb I am. But considering the company I'm in, Jesus and Miles and Tony waiting for us somewhere up the pike, I got no grief with the world. Thank you.
So much. The authors will be signing out front, and we hope to see you next year. Thank you, thank you, thank you.